regular meeting of the Harbor Commission for August 15th, 2019. Emily, would you do a roll call, please?
Yes. John Stedman.
Here.
Lang Sly.
Here.
Betsy Kramer.
Here.
Jim Sloan.
Here.
Merritt McRae.
Here.
Shoham Yaniv.
Here.
And absent is Bill Splicer.
Thank you very much. And Director Bossy, are there any changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, there are no proposed changes for tonight's meeting.
Thank you very much. So at this time, we would take public comment, but there are no public comment requests for items that aren't already agendized. So Mr. Wixon, your public comment will come at item 6. Okay? Approval of the minutes, Emily?
Second.
Second? Very well. Next item.
No, we have to vote on it. All in favor?
All in favor of approval of the minutes?
Aye.
Say aye.
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 Okay.
Okay, let's move on to item number 2, department update. And I guess,
Item
would you
number
read that,
2,
please?
recruitment process for waterfront director position. Recommendation that the Harbor Commission receive a status report from Paul Casey, City Administrator, on the recruitment process for the waterfront director position.
Mr. Casey?
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. Thank you very much for hearing me tonight. I want to give you a status report about the waterfront director position. As I think you all know, Scott Reedman retired from city service at the beginning of the month. I want to thank Scott for his service to the city. He served the city for 22 years. The last 8 years as waterfront director, before that as the business manager. I think he served very admirably and accomplished a great deal in his service with the city. He's left the department in a great condition. It is sound financially, which is very good news. He's got a lot of very good competent staff that has been working under him and helping move the department forward, which I really appreciate. And Scott's just a great guy. I think we all just enjoy working with him and what a good soul he is. And so we wish him well in his retirement. But we do have a vacancy. And so now we need to go through the process of filling that vacancy. I believe I sent you an email about the interim approach that I'll take while I do a recruitment. And you've got very competent staff in the department. And so I've asked both Brian Bossy and Carl Treiberg to each serve as acting waterfront director for 2 months each. I expect this process will take about 4 months, might take a little bit longer, but it should be right around that. And so Mr. Bossy has agreed to serve as acting waterfront director for the first 2 months, and then we'll switch and have Carl Treiberg be acting waterfront director after that. These 3 gentlemen work very well together. I expect them to continue to work well together until one of them retires as well in the near future, but we'll save that for another day. And so I fully expect to be in close communication with all of them, and the department I don't think should miss a beat during this interim period. So then we move forward with the recruitment. As with any department head, I will do an open recruitment. It's a standard policy I have that I think serves the community and the city and myself well. And so I will open up that recruitment. It's pretty straightforward in the sense that I need a waterfront director, and so I don't need to be kind of thinking if there's a reorganization shuffle or anything like that. No, I need a waterfront director. So we've got a job description that's in pretty good shape. We'll just tighten that up if need be with any legal requirements and such. We'll get a job announcement out on the street, and we will accept applications. Fully expect to have internal candidates and external candidates. I think that's good. I think it's a good recruitment when you have both. I will then we'll screen the applications that come in, probably get it down to the top 7 or 8 candidates, and set up some interview panels. I will come back to you all and ask probably for 2 of you to serve on an all-day interview panel. Some of you served on the last panel about 8 years ago when we recruited for the waterfront director position at that time. It's a full day, so it's a big time commitment, so I appreciate if you have the interest and ability to do so. but it's really great to get your perspective on the applicant pool to help inform me on my decision. I'll have other department heads on the panel, I'll have some community members on the panel, and that'll kind of run some experts from other jurisdictions who understand what it means to be a waterfront director on the panel as well. So we'll do that. We'll narrow down the process, and then I will do one-on-one interviews with the top candidates that come out of that. And from there, I will make my final recommendation. It does require me to go to the city council to get their concurrence with my recommendation, but they generally are supportive of the recommendation, so I don't expect any problems with that. So that's kind of the nutshell. Again, I think it takes 4, 5, 6 months to complete the process. Just depends if you have any hiccups on the way, depends on how many one-on-one interviews I need to have to be comfortable with the decision. It's an important decision, so I don't like to rush it. But I'm fully expect that we'll have a good slew of candidates, again, both internally and externally, to help lead the department forward and work with you all in your roles as commissioners. So that's kind of a status report. Happy to answer any questions you might have about that.
Commissioner Sloan?
Yeah, I'd just like to echo your sentiments about Scott. I mean, he was a great guy to work with, and we're sorry to see him go, and I think I speak for most of us up here that we wish him well and appreciate everything he did for the commission and the city.
Yes, I agree with you, Commissioner Sloan.
Yeah.
And I do also.
Yeah, and I'll just, one thing I always reflected with Scott is how we forget, some of us who've been around a while, Harbor Commission meetings and life down on the waterfront has not always been smooth, pretty, and easy. And during Scott's tenure, it has run well. There have been issues, but they've been resolved. Your leadership as commissioners, I think, has helped that as well. But it's something I don't take for granted because it's a very unique setup we have down in the waterfront department. You've got leaseholders, you've got slip holders, you've got a lot of tourism industry going on. You just have a lot of different constituencies and interests. And so he managed that very well over the years, both as business manager and as waterfront director, and I want to acknowledge that.
Excellent. Any other questions, commissioners?
Great.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So I will be back probably in a couple months to ask for 2 of you to help serve on that all-day panel. The other thing I wanted to say, if you have anything you want to share with me about the certain qualities and traits that I should be looking at in the next director, send me an email. I'm going to be working with the department staff, meeting with them to get their insights and perspectives of what they're looking for the next waterfront director. I'd be very interested in getting any comments you have to help inform me as well. So please send those on my way.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Good.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to item number 3, Director's Report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. We have a brief director's report for you this evening. Trying something a little different here, see if this will get us through. All right, it won't. Oh, there we go. A little slow. Since our last meeting, City Council approved a number of actions. They approved a resolution allowing for the destruction of certain waterfront department records in accordance with the Santa Barbara Records Management Policies and Procedures Manual, as well as approved by the City Attorney's Office. They also adopted an ordinance to execute 2 amendments to the NOAA Shearwater lease. They approved a 5-year license agreement with the California Sea Urchin Commission, the Santa Barbara chapter. And finally, the last action they've taken since we met last month was they approved amendments to various sections of Title 17 of the Municipal Code pertaining to protection of the harbor and issuance of slip and liveaboard permits. And this was an item that Mr. Cronman presented to you a number of months ago, and this just happened this past Tuesday. Next, the Commercial Fishermen Subcommittee. For quite some time, long-term gear storage has been a significant concern of the local commercial fishing industry. And Council recently directed the Waterfront Department to help address the issue. And so we gladly took that on. Mr. Triberg's heading that up. On the 5th of August, the Commercial Fishermen Subcommittee met and was attended by Commissioners Sly and Yaniv. Thank you for attending. The purpose of that particular meeting was more introductory. We informed attendees of the authority and the responsibility of the various city departments and decision-making bodies that have a stake in the issue. And the Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara also presented a state of the commercial fishing industry in and around Santa Barbara. At that meeting, the waterfront staff provided information on some existing services provided to the industry by the waterfront department, those things we have down in the harbor itself. Carl also looked at existing zoning uses at the waterfront and areas south of the 101. At the conclusion of that meeting, waterfront staff recommended the idea of conducting a review of opportunities and constraints, going a little bit more in depth as far as zoning issues, parcels of land and things like that, and with the idea of reconvening the subcommittee once that review is completed. I should let you know, and most of you do, that next Thursday at 10 a.m., the Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara as well as city staff will be conducting a series of site visits, and will be meeting at the city pier, which is 123 Harbor Way, and we'll be going to a number of sites as part of this process. And lastly, tentative agenda items for next month's meeting. We quite possibly, based on the success of next week's meeting, have a Commercial Fishermen Subcommittee update. I'll be presenting the fiscal year 2019 year-end report, so where we ended up at the end of July 30th. And I will, two more things, the proposed lease agreement with Marine Services, as well as a proposed lease agreement with Harbor Marine Works. And that concludes my director's report. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I guess you're so thorough, there's no questions. Director Bossi. All right, moving on to item number 4, Facilities Management Report.
Good evening, Chair Stedman and Commissioners. This evening I'm going to report on our minor capital improvement projects. And just by way of background, these are different from the major projects that I present to you every year, usually every other year, usually in February. The major projects are approved by council. They're typically over $100,000 with a useful life of more than 5 years. Well, that leaves a whole lot of projects that cost much less than $100,000 that we consider minor capital improvements that we identify and develop objectives around as part of our P3 performance objectives. In 2019, we identified 27 projects. We completed 21, just below our goal, our objective of 80%. It's sometimes it looks easy at the beginning of the year when we identify all these projects, but then you get down to the end of the fiscal year and it's not so easy anymore. But some of the projects are recurring projects, like we have goals of replacing a certain amount of deck boards on Stearns Wharf every year and installing a certain number of fiberglass piled jackets under the wharf, under the buildings. But most of them are distinct and unique projects. And over the past 10 years, we've completed about 150 different unique projects. Almost all of them are done by staff. So it's a program we're quite proud of. There's a variety of projects that are completed every year, and I was just going to go through some of these just to give you a sense for what we do. You've heard a bit about the electric submetering program this year. Most of the sub-meters were installed as part of larger projects, the Marina One project, but quite a few are done by staff. Out on QR&S Finger, for example, those docks were built in the late 1990s and they had sub-meters in them. By the time the program was ready to implement, all the sub-meters were just kind of too old, so we had to replace all of those. Different power center types, these are all different, so staff is pretty competent at replacing them. And this is typical sub-meter little display. About 700 we read in the field, and about 400 transmits the data back to us directly. So this is a program we've just started billing, and it seems to be going pretty smooth, and hopefully in a few months it's going to be a routine project. We do certain projects related to security. One is lighting upgrades, in particular the Ledbetter restrooms along Marinas 2, 3, and 4, and the commercial area out on Stearns Wharf. Fairly straightforward and simple projects. But lighting up areas that are dark really helps security. This is the back of Marina 3 restroom. Late at night, it's dark. A lot of the slip holders have complained about it, so my staff does this, runs new conduit, and sets these lights up, and it's made a pretty significant difference. The Ledbetter restroom, some of you are familiar with, it has a changing area that's a great place for people to hide all night long, so we installed some lights there, and that's helped Harbor Patrol maintain security in that area as well. The ice house, you hear about the ice house frequently. It's a constant source of frustration for all of us, and it's a key asset, an important asset for the commercial fishermen, but it's very difficult to maintain. It's quite old. We do have a project in place designed to replace key components. Just hired a couple of consultants this week, as a matter of fact, and we'll be kicking that off shortly. But this is what's called the discharge auger, the lift auger. The ice is made by equipment up here. It's dumped into a bin down here, and then pushed out via this auger, and comes out hoses, and it either goes into boats on this side or into totes and trucks on the other side. The auger itself has bearings. The bearings wore out, and it got to the point where it was just non-reliable anymore. So this is something that my staff could do. It was about almost $10,000 or $15,000 after all was said and done, but it's a fairly significant and difficult project. But fortunately, we completed it before the bearings burned out completely, and we wouldn't have been able to get the ice out of the bin. That would have been a shame. Fire hose cabinets, these are related to code upgrades we do periodically. Fire department will come down. Sometimes there's code issues related to pressure and flow, or just the size of the hose outlets right here that had changed, something that had changed fairly recently. So we do this. It's a fairly typical project. This was on Marinas 2 and 3, I believe, and we completed that this year. You've heard a lot about parking pay stations over the years, and this is many, many years, believe it or not, in the process of getting this designed and approved. But we just finished installation of the last parking pay stations in the Chase Palm Park lot and the Garden Street lot, and this has been 3 or 4 or 5 years to get this reviewed and approved, but we finally done it, so we're kind of pleased, and I think it's serving the parking folks quite well. There's enough adequate for them to get their parking tickets quickly and go and enjoy the beach. Another project I've presented to you in the past is a guardrail on Stearns Wharf. This went through extensive review at the Architectural Board of Review. Some commissioners kind of helped us through that process, they may recall. Out on the end of the wharf, there was no guardrail, so we installed one with cable rails on it. But the rest of the wharf had to have boards added to it to meet the code requirements of no more than a 4-inch gap. So that was, we did over 600 feet of that this past year. The entire wharf now is code compliant, and we consider it much safer. This was kind of a fun project that our staff recently did. This is the kiosk on Stearns Wharf for the water taxi and Azure Seas cruises, dinner cruises. It's just a small kiosk that was built years ago and really kind of taken a beating from the harsh marine environment. And our staff rebuilt or re-sided this whole thing. They did these little kelp overlays. There's ship's wheels, dolphins, and just really did a neat job. And I think the Hirschmans who operate this business were quite pleased with it, and it looks good, and it's a nice amenity out on the wharf. So as I mentioned, there were 27 minor CIPs for 2019. We completed 21. It's kind of one shy of our objective. We'll see if we have fewer projects next year. It'd be nice to meet this objective. We seem to come up one shy on a regular basis, but we try. We spend about $350,000 every year. It's more or less floats around that much. A lot of it comes out of the Harbor Preservation Fund, the same thing that our capital projects come out of, the same fund. And some of it comes out of our operating budget as well, some of these smaller projects like the lighting. In general, it's a good program. It's a great way for my staff to demonstrate their trade skills and their ingenuity in, on, and below the water, and really appreciate their efforts. And that concludes my presentation this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Slump?
So $350,000 was budgeted. How much was spent?
That's about how much we spent. We also track over and under.
Okay.
It's a little easier to kind of bring these projects in under budget or on budget because they're relatively small. Last year we spent about $300,000. This year we spent about $350,000.
Okay. Thanks.
Commissioner McCray?
Yes. I was wondering if you could explain the difference between a pile wrap and the fiberglass pile jackets and what they do for us.
Chair Stedman and Commissioner McCray, Every wooden pile has a wrap, a polyurea coating. The older ones, we actually physically wrap them and band them. Nowadays, when we buy a pile, it's already dipped in this coating. So when they drive a pile, it's already done. So you want to do that to protect the wood from the teredo worms, the shipworms. So every pile has that for the most part. Fiberglass jacket is a jacket that we put around piles that are underneath buildings. So you can't drive a new pile under a building. So what piles tend to do is they tend to kind of hourglass as they get eaten up over the years. And we inspect them every 3 years. We rotate through 3 years. We put rebar horizontally along, fiberglass rebar along the pile. We wrap it with a jacket, and then we fill that with grout. So you're essentially using what's left of the wooden pile as a form for fiberglass and grout, and that kind of just restores the structural integrity of the pile, especially for load bearing. So that's the difference between those two.
Thank you. Does it seem that you're keeping up with the need for that, or do you need to do more?
I think we're keeping up. Several years ago, we identified all the piles under the buildings, and we started proactively just installing fiberglass jackets. We just last year got past the ones that really needed it, so the next ones will be kind of looking forward. It's probably several more years before every pile under the buildings, this is the Harbor Restaurant and what we call the 217, 219, and 221 buildings, will have fiberglass wrapped wooden piles. And we'll do something similar on the city pier coming up under the ice house as well. So I think that we had a structural analysis done by an engineering firm called Moffitt & Nickel. So we kind of have the what we call design immunity related with that technique. So we feel pretty confident that we're keeping up. And as far as driving the wooden piles, about every year we find 30 or 40, and we replace those that are really bad, and they don't seem to get too many more than that. El Nino a couple years ago had a lot of big waves and didn't have a lot of excessive damage, so we're pretty confident as indicators that we're doing a reasonable job keeping the wharf maintained.
Thank you. That sounds great. I just wanted to mention the value of that ice house to the commercial fishery and the people around the harbor before we got too far away from it. When it was first installed, it was a great thing and really provided the commercial fishery with something that was really lacking previously. I know that Morro Bay lost theirs, and it was tragic for the fishery out of that particular harbor. And I just want to commend you for making sure that it continues to run and pump ice. I know that our fish market uses that ice regularly. Trucks come up and get ice as well as the boats. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Carl. So now we will move on to new business.
Item number 5, proposed assignment of lease agreement number 25436, Blue Water Hunter, located at 117D Harbor Way. Recommendation that the Harbor Commission review and recommend City Council approve the assignment of lease agreement number 25436 from Mr. Andrew Taylor, DBA Blue Water Hunter, to Jethro Acosta for the 878 square foot retail store located at 117D Harbor Way.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Again, just to reiterate what Emily stated, this is a proposed assignment of the Blue Water Hunter lease. Blue Water Hunter is located at 117D Harbor Way, and it's currently owned by Mr. Andrew Taylor. Mr. Taylor has significantly upgraded the space in the last 2.5 years to include new and expanded offerings, including a large variety of wetsuits, masks, fins, and air tanks, as well as comprehensive repair services. Andy's there on the left, and the proposed new owner, a very experienced waterman, Mr. Jethro Acosta, is here tonight as well. These improvements that he put through in the last 2.5 years have really improved the visibility of Blue Water Hunter down in the harbor. Regarding the proposed lease assignment, the assignment was requested by the existing owner, again, Mr. Taylor, in June of this year. And as is commonplace with all of our proposed lease assignments, there are no change to the existing terms. So if this is approved, Mr. Acosta would be on the same terms as the existing lease. The proposed new owner, again, is Mr. Jethro Acosta. He's an accomplished local waterman, as you can see from the photo before. He's been scuba certified since 1989. He has over 30 years of spearfishing and scuba experience, and he was, if I'm not mistaken, a customer of Blue Water Hunter way back when it was located out in Goleta. So he's a regular around the harbor, and many people know of him. He's worked a lot with Andy Taylor over the years as well. As in regards to the lease terms, it's a 5-year, originally it was a 5-year lease term. He has about 2.5 years left on that particular lease. So again, 2.5 years left. The base rent,
It's the security button. I haven't touched it. If you can hear me. Yeah, I'm sorry. There's something wrong. Maybe, Nick, could you call?
oh, there they go.
What's police non-emergency? Remember off the top? I need to take care of it. I'm sending somebody. There's an emergency alert button at several locations in the chambers, and it malfunctioned Tuesday during the city council meeting, and I was laughing at Dan Henschke while it happened to him. So I'm being paid back now.
I'd call him.
Yeah, I know.
Well, that is no sign of the proposed ownership by Mr. Jethro Acosta by any means. We did not do that on purpose. Again, back to the base rent is a little over $2,700 per square month. There is a percentage rent clause in there that varies depending on what type of sales activity is taking place, and there is an annual rent adjustment that's in line with the cost of living increases based on the consumer price index. The current tenant, Mr. Andy Taylor, is a tenant in good standing. He's active in the harbor community, and with that, that concludes our presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the proposed lease assignment.
Vice Chairman Sly.
The variable percentage rent, what is the reason for that rather than just a percentage of gross rents, which is easier to keep track of?
Chair Stedman, Commissioner Sly, it would be easier to track. And in a lot of our leases, we have gone that way, and I wouldn't say that's out of the question when the lease comes up in 2.5 years as well. But for a long time, many of our leases had a variable lease component, and it just depends on what type of activity is taking place. With some of our lease tenants who work on engines or sell boat engines, there's a higher percentage on that than there is when they sell a life jacket. So it just depends on the item. So again, I don't think we'd be opposed to in the future looking at options to just make it one percentage and move on from there. It would make it easier on the tenant as well as our accounting staff.
Okay, thank you.
Do you know off the top of your head what the allowed uses are for this, in this lease?
Off the top of my head, I believe it's sales and repair of diving equipment, spearfishing equipment. Mr. Taylor also has a very active, he fills tanks.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, it's the only local tank.
Air fill station.
Yeah, air fill station around. So that's an important part of his business. Masks, I believe he's allowed to sell T-shirts with his logo on them. And I think he can also run some charter activity outside of there as well.
Okay, but no consumables like Cokes and that type of stuff?
I don't believe he has Cokes or drinks. We have neighbors for that
Right.
that'll be happy to provide that service.
Okay, great, thank you.
I have a question, Director Bossi. So it's a new 5-year term, right, for Mr. Acosta? Or are you taking it?
I would prefer a higher term, but I think it starts at just the existing lease and then
Yeah, Mr. Chair, great question. Sorry I didn't make that clear enough in the presentation. The initial term was 5 years. There's 2.5 years left on that 5-year term. So Mr. Acosta is assuming the lease with 2.5 years left on it. Again, that goes along with our common practice of when a lease transfer is approved, they assume the entire lease. There are no changes to that. So we would then go back before that 2.5 years up and see if Mr. Acosta is interested in moving forward with that. And assuming he's a tenant in good standing, our practice and policy is to move forward with a negotiation process with him.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian.
I'll make
Jim?
a motion to approve the
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, several seconds. I like that. Approved. Let's vote. And then approve it. Call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion is approved. And now we move on to item number 6. So I guess we'll take public comment at this time on item number 6. Do you want to read item number 6, please?
Brian, do you want to kind of outline?
Or,
Yep, Mr. Chair, what we would like to do with this is Emily will read the item. We'll then give a staff presentation. From that point, at the conclusion of that, the commission can ask any questions they have of the presentation, what they heard, what they're thinking. Staff will do our best to answer those questions. And then at that point in time, we can open it up to public comment regarding the item. And once you close public comment, it'll come back to you for your comments and discussion.
excellent, excuse me, Mr. Wixon. Okay. I think that's,
So item number 6, proposed parking ordinance changes. Recommendation that the Harbor Commission review and forward proposed municipal code Title 17 amendments to the City Council Ordinance Committee.
Director Bossi.
Good evening, Commissioners. Before I get started with the presentation, I do want to let everybody know that we received a number of emails regarding this particular item, and so we printed those out and we've supplied those to the Harbor Commission. There's also copies of the emails on the back counter for the public. I'd also like to let you know that tonight I have the team of folks who've been working on this for quite some time. Mick Cromman, our Harbor Operations Manager, Eric Ingebretson, our Harbor Patrol Supervisor, Cesar Barrios is our Parking Supervisor, and we're also very thankful to have Mr. Ariel Kalan, who is the City Attorney for the City of Santa Barbara, who's been an integral part of this whole process.
I'm able to telepathically summon.
Please, so be careful. Okay. Real quick, an overview of waterfront parking operations. We have 8 public parking lots down in the waterfront that we operate, all along Cabrillo Boulevard. It includes Stearns Wharf. We also have 2 joint-use parking lots that we operate in conjunction with Santa Barbara City College, and those are the La Playa lots, which are on both sides of La Playa Stadium. We have 2 types of permits, annual permits that we sell. The first is a general permit, or a red permit as people know it as, and that's $125 per year. We also have a slip permittee permit, and those are $95 a year. As far as the general permit is concerned, again, this is the red permit, as people know them. This exempts the vehicles from hourly parking fees in waterfront lots. You can come in and come out at your own discretion. They are not valid on Stearns Wharf, and with a red permit, you're allowed to park in Harbor, Maine. Again, Harbor, Maine, up to 72 hours at a time. Our slip permittee permit, or blue permit, exempts vehicles, same kind of thing, from hourly parking fees in waterfront parking lots. It's not valid on State Street. However, this particular permit is for slip permittees. So you only get 1 blue permit per slip permit. So 1 permit for 1 slip permit. And you are allowed to park in Harbor, Maine indefinitely. So 24/7, 365 days a year. The current situation down at the waterfront, and this has been going on for a number of years, we've had an increased demand in parking. Available parking spaces, especially in the Harbor Main lot, have long been in high demand. However, with the growth in water sports, especially of stand-up paddling, as well as kayaking, in addition to the activity that takes place in the Funk Zone, a very popular area in the region, as well as the reopening of Lower State Street. All this popularity of these areas adds additional stress to what is a finite resource. So what happens quite frequently on any nice spring or summer or even fall weekend, we'll have temporary closures of various lots, and this happens quite a bit in Harbor, Maine. Consequently, with all these increases, we've seen a significant increase in complaints from not only the public, but slip permittees, businesses, visitors, and everybody in between, wanting to come down to the harbor on a nice sunny afternoon, not being able to park in Harbor, Maine, and having to move out to farther and farther out from the lots. So, based on those complaints, here's just not based on those complaints, but here's just an average Wednesday afternoon in Harbor, Maine. You can see lots of vehicles parked. So in order to get a better read on what was going on out in the parking lots and to ascertain people's ideas, the issues that they were encountering in our harbor parking lots, we conducted a public workshop on June 13th of this year. It was held in our Marina classroom. There were over 50 attendees. I think it got over 60. Well, I stopped counting at 58. We broke the groups up into 5 separate groups. Each was also assigned a staff person, who was there to kind of keep the conversation on track and just write everything down that they heard and were instructed to write down. And what were they writing down? Well, they were writing down answers to 3 questions. The first was, what is currently working well, which I'm happy to say that there were a number of things that were working well. We're always happy to hear that. They were also asked, what needs to be fixed? And there were quite a bit of answers on that one as well. And then lastly, what needs to be left alone? I should let you know that the attachment number 1 to your staff report takes all of the comments, we group them, and we prioritize them based on the number of times they were repeated. And so it's on a priority basis, if you will. So that's, again, as attachment 1 to your staff report. For this particular effort, we decided it would be best to work on the what needs to be fixed and the answers to those questions. And again, all answers were important, and we'll continue to look at them for future actions if warranted. So they don't just go away. These are on our desk. We continue to look at these, and we will well into the future. But we did prioritize these, again, based on how many times they came up. And again, our current effort will focus on those with the majority agreement from the June 13th meeting. So with that, the number 1 item that came in, this issue was advanced at all 5 tables, was the idea of enforcement of parking rules. People wanted more enforcement, more activity out in all of the parking lots. To that end, we started looking at our statistics, and Harbor Patrol has issued 124 citations for the 72-hour violations. They've issued 8 citations for camping, and over the last 2 calendar years, 0 for operability. That may strike you as odd, but generally what happens is when we see a vehicle that looks inoperable, we will contact the owner. Sometimes it takes a little while to contact these folks, but they will be given roughly 48 hours to prove operability, and so far everybody has been able to do that. But as a result of this item being advanced at all 5 tables, since that time, Harbor Patrol has increased their patrols. So we took that advice, we took it to heart, and we made some changes. And Harbor Patrol is, again, increasing their patrols.
Hey, Brian, just before you leave that, what period is that? 124 citations?
That's over a 2 calendar year period. The second item that was advanced was the oil. A lot of consternation about the oil industry crew members parking in Harbor, Maine, and the other waterfront parking lots. I want to assure everybody that this is a temporary situation. The Casitas Pier in Carpinteria was badly damaged via a number of winter storms. And back in March, 2 of the main contractors called us up and asked for emergency relief. They actually, at that time, already had workers out on the derricks, and they weren't sure where they were going to bring them home to. So in the spirit of regional cooperation, we worked with them to open up our harbor, both for the transport of equipment and the transport of employees. So currently they have 2 types of employees. They have day workers, every day coming in and out, early in the morning, late in the afternoon. That ends up being about 30 to 70 vehicles, and who were originally parking in waterfront Maine because it's easy access to the city pier. Knowing that the impact knowing the impact they were having on our parking resources and wanting to be considerate of our resources, they have instructed all of their daytime workers to park in the La Playa lots. So if you go by the La Playa lots any day now, you'll see 30 to 50 to 70 vehicles parked out there. So they are parking out in the La Playa lots and walking in. Their other type of worker is the overnight workers. These are folks who are out on the derricks for between 7 and 14 days. So they have to park their car overnight. Well, the only place to park their car overnight in the area is Harbor Main, at least in our parking lots. And that ended up between 20 and 30 vehicles taking up spaces in Harbor Main. I should let you know that in discussions I had with the main contractors last week, they began on August 8th they are now shuttling their overnight workers in. So they usually come again on 7 and 14-day shifts. So they will just drive them up from Carpinteria or from wherever on a bus, drop them off, and they'll walk out. So those 20 to 30 spaces in Harbor Main have now been freed up. So again, they've been very helpful in working with us. But one thing that came of this regarding everybody's issues with the oil crew members using our facilities, and they did all have to buy permits, was that we realized that the Waterfront Department currently has no authority to deny parking permits. So basically, you show up and you want a parking permit. Again, this is the general permit, obviously. We issue a permit if you pay and provide your license and all that other information. So knowing that and knowing the impact that could have in the future, staff recommends an amendment to the municipal code, and that would be 1736.010. And we title this one, Duty and Power to Manage. The waterfront director shall have the duty and power to manage all uses of waterfront parking lots and may deny issuance of parking permits to any person or entity when such permit or permits would unduly interfere with coastal access or public parking. So this is an important one that I think, if advanced, will have a significant positive impact on waterfront parking. The third issue that was advanced, we grouped these. They're all related, but it includes too many storage vehicles, eliminate oversized vehicles, and people had an issue with blue permits, should not be allowed 24/7, 365-day-a-year parking without ever having to move. So again, I'm going to go through these one by one. 3A, too many storage vehicles. The original intent of the blue permit, again, the blue permit allows you parking the entire year as long as your vehicle is operable. So the original intent of that permit was for multi-day ocean trips, people who are going out to the islands or going on long-range marine-related activities, fishing, scuba, etc. However, over the years, some slip permittees use the lot to store their vehicles. They may, quite frequently, a lot of them live off-site in homes and whatnot, but they have a larger vehicle and they store their vehicle down on the lot. They may have all their scuba stuff in there, their diving stuff, SUPs, etc. So it's become more of a garage than anything. So again, vehicles are used as garages and storage units negatively impact the harbor community, and storage units inhibit access to the coast. So all these vehicles that are sitting there not moving deny people access to the coast, to the businesses, to their slips, to their boats. Here is a vehicle that is still out there today. And again, this isn't an oversized vehicle. It's a standard vehicle, but hasn't moved in quite some time. I should also let you know an important part of this is the recently approved local coastal program. We work closely with city planning as well as the Coastal Commission, and the Coastal Commission and planning are very aware of the issues in the waterfront parking lots. To that end, this particular action was taken, Section 3.1-19, long-term parking in the harbor parking lots, and this appears in the local coastal program. Long-term parking of vehicles that are primarily used for storage shall be discouraged and not displace coastal access parking within the harbor lots. 3B, eliminate oversized vehicles. I should start off by saying oversized vehicles are an important component of the harbor. They're important for delivering goods and services, both to local businesses as well as slip permittees. And oversized vehicles will continue to be allowed access to all of our parking lots. I want to make that clear. Oversized vehicles will still be allowed to have access to all of our parking lots. However, due to the proliferation of these vehicles and storage of them, the department proposes eliminating annual permits for any vehicle exceeding one or more of the following size constraints. And here they are. The first is 22 feet long. The current limit we have is 20 feet. 22 feet has become more of a standard as far as trucks and larger vehicles. Or 90 inches high. And I want to note that the height limit on city streets regarding oversized vehicles is 82 inches. So we bumped that up an additional 8 inches, knowing that we don't have the same issues as the vehicles that were parked on city streets. And lastly, width, 82 inches wide. Now, obviously, one size doesn't fit all, and we understand that. So we have put in the proposed amendments, possible waivers on the size constraints. And these waivers would be maybe for commercial, ocean-dependent priorities, including but not limited to commercial fishing operations. Again, we're a working harbor. Leaseholder businesses, where the vehicle is absolutely necessary for their business. Business activity permit holders, again, if the vehicle is absolutely necessary for their business. If they're a painter or do some stencil etching for boats, I'm thinking a large oversized step van probably is not required of their business. And then lastly, oil spill response activities and their vehicles associated with that. So slip permittees, this is 3C, sorry, blue permits should not be allowed 24/7, 365-day parking. Slip permittee permits currently are allowed, again, to stay indefinitely. Again, the original intent was for multi-day ocean trips. This intent has been abused, and it's not by everybody, obviously, but these vehicles inhibit access to the coast. So here's what we propose, and I am not going to read that, but I can sum that up very quickly with this next slide. Staff recommends amending the municipal code as follows. The harbor slip permittees may park, again, blue permits, may park for no longer than 30 consecutive days. So again, from a evergreen permit to 30 consecutive days. So on that 30th day, if you're still there, you're going to need to exit the harbor main lot for 96 consecutive hours before reentry. So you can't just go in and turn around. Why 30 days? That's a long time when you think about it. If your car is sitting around for 30 days, it's probably leaning more towards a storage vehicle than anything else. And granted, there are exceptions to that, but I would imagine they're very, very few and far between. If you go up, you've got to get groceries at Vons, and you take your car on day 15 and you come back, that clock starts again. So you're constantly moving that. If you're moving your vehicle, you don't have anything to worry about. 30 days is a long period of time. Now, when we were looking at blue permits, we had to look at red permits too. They have issues of their own. So currently, the red permits may park for no longer than 72 hours in Harbor Main if they receive permission. And we have given permission over the years, and sometimes that has been taken advantage of. We found that people who needed that extra week actually came down to park their car and went to Europe for the week, or Wisconsin, or wherever. They just used this lot as a storage lot instead of parking at the airport or another more appropriate location. So to that end, staff recommends amending the municipal code to limit extensions for maritime reasons only. And that would read as follows. The waterfront director or his or her designee may permit a person to park a vehicle in the harbor parking lot over the 72-hour limit for maritime reasons. The vehicle owner must register with the Waterfront Department Parking Office and obtain and display in the vehicle written evidence of permission prior to leaving the vehicle in the harbor parking lot. We feel that this is a good way to address this issue. If you're out for maritime-related issues, that's fine. We'd be happy to issue an extension on that. That's what the parking is for. The number 4 item on the list, everybody a great deal of people wanted longer hours at the Los Baños exit. A lot of people don't even know there's a Los Baños exit. So currently, between May 1st and September 31st, it's operated Wednesday through Friday from 3 to 8 p.m., Saturday and Sunday from 11 to 8, and then the slower season, October 1st to April 30th, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 3 to 7 on Friday, and then 11 to 8 on Saturday and Sunday. So again, we took what the folks said to heart, and we made some changes. Thanks to Cesar Barrios and his staff. Beginning, I believe this started July 15th. From May 1st to September 30th, Los Baños exit will be opened every day, 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. And it's been quite busy since we opened this, so it's been a nice addition. We had to staff up, but this is a great benefit, I think, to everybody. And then when we fall back to the slower months, October 1st to April 30th, we'll generally operate along the same lines as previous. However, we always have the opportunity, if it's 90 degrees in October and a beautiful weekend, we will staff this all day long. It's not a problem. So we have that flexibility. These aren't set in stone, except for the part daily, 8 a.m. or 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. The 5th item that came up was that special events make parking difficult. I think we all agree. We have quite a number of events down in the waterfront. It's a popular place. That's a good thing. It's a good problem to have. I should let you know that over the years, special events have declined. Back in 2011, our parking staff participated in, one way or the other, roping off, doing traffic control and things like that, 285 special events during the year. Last calendar year, 2018, we participated in 130. So it has gone down, but nonetheless, there's still an impact. This is things like both ocean and non-ocean related, whether it's Wet Wednesdays and night moves, or it's the marathon, Veterans Marathon. It's all impacts. So we looked at this, and we believe that events are a good thing for everybody. And our waterfront lots are first come, first served. And what that does is that provides equal access to the public, regardless of who you are or what permit you have. First come, first serve seems to be the best way of operation for our parking lots. However, noting the concern over special events, what we'd like to do is expand our social media use. We've got a number of feeds, and what we would like to do is put items out there when there's a big event happening, when there's a wedding at the Maritime Museum of 350 people. We'd like to send something out and let people know that, hey, there's a big event, plan your trip accordingly. That's a tricky balance. We don't want to discourage people from coming down to the harbor. We want to continue to encourage them, but we just want them to be aware that it's a busy weekend. Be careful. Plan your trip accordingly. Item number 6. This came up from a number of folks. The need for designated parking for slip permittees. So our thoughts on this are designating parking would preclude public access to the harbor and the coast. Designated parking is not consistent with public interest, nor is it consistent with what a public parking lot is used for. Again, it's for the public. And again, we feel first come, first serve provides equal access to everybody. It's a fair playing field. Item number 7, folks were concerned that we are losing parking spaces from restriping, and ADA spaces appear and regular spaces are lost. Waterfront public parking lots are patched, slurry sealed, and restriped on a recurring basis, and this happens generally every 5 to 7 years. As part of this process, it requires submittal of detailed plans, and we have to receive permits from the city's building department. And those plans and permits must conform to current building codes, which includes ADA requirements. Again, ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. So yeah, quite frequently we do have to add additional ADA spaces in accordance with the law, and these spaces are larger than standard spaces, and consequently, they do, on occasion, result in the loss of standard spaces. But again, in order to keep our lots up to snuff and what we think the public deserves, and know the public deserves, this will continue to be the practice. And the last item that received majority approval was the concern of non-waterfront businesses parking in Harbor Main with general permits, again, the red permit. And we understand, we get it, and this is also addressed regarding the oil crew boats back on item number 2. So again, duty and power to manage. The waterfront director shall have the duty and power to manage all uses of waterfront parking lots and may deny issuance of parking permits to any person or entity when such permit or permits would unduly interfere with coastal access or parking. Now, this particular item wasn't so much directed at the oil workers. This was more, we've seen it, a lot more cab companies. There's been limousine companies, landscape construction companies, contractors who park their work, go by permit, and they don't have a yard, so they use these public parking lots as their storage yard for their vehicles. They come down in the morning, hop in them, leave, come back in the afternoon, and take their own vehicle home. So this would address that as well as the oil worker issue as well. So in conclusion, the increased popularity of the waterfront is overall, I think, a good thing, but it has increased the pressures on what is a limited and finite resource. As a result, we've received increasing amounts of complaints, and again, we decided to obviously do something about this. We held our public meeting, our workshop on June 13th, and have been working on the proposed amendments to the municipal code since that time, and we've been thinking about this for years. But the waterfront staff have worked with the city attorney, Mr. Kalan, as well as our community development department to address these issues. As you've seen from the presentation, we've implemented a number of operational changes and will continue to do that. The two we've implemented again are the increased enforcement by Harbor Patrol and then the expanded hours at the Los Baños exit. Other things that we'll continue to look at as far as on an operational side of things, there was a lot of concern and has been for a number of years regarding how the launch ramp parking lot area is structured. So we're going to continue to look at that. We had a meeting last week among staff where we're looking at possibly putting in some additional loading and unloading zones for people with scuba tanks and things like that. Because when those folks come in and can't park, and they've got to park a far way away, and they're dragging 20 of these tanks over to Sea Landing, that's not right. So we want to try and help that out as much as possible. So as staff, we believe that the proposed municipal code amendments would, one, minimize the misuse of the public parking lots. It would preserve the working harbor per the Harbor Master Plan and the local coastal program. And it would enhance access to public parking lots and the coast, not only for slip permittees, business owners, visitors, and the general public, everybody in between. To that end, on July 22nd, we had a meeting of the Harbor Commission Parking Subcommittee, and they heard pretty much the same presentation. There were some good comments that resulted from that discussion, and in the end, the subcommittee unanimously approved the proposed amendments to the municipal code 3-0, and that's what brings us here this evening to discuss with the full Harbor Commission. And that concludes my presentation, and we would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Commissioner Kramer?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Bossy. And I have a couple of questions, specifically on number 2. The permit may be denied if it would unduly interfere with coastal access or public parking. What is unduly? How would you define that situation that you could do?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, I would, for an example, I would describe unduly as a landscape contractor using parking permits to park his fleet of vehicles down at the waterfront when they have no business being at the waterfront.
Would it also apply to a funk zone employer buying permits for his employees that have no connection whatsoever with the waterfront?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, yes, it would. And to that end, over the past 2 to 3 years, we have had a number of funk zone businesses, very large, successful funk zone businesses coming in to purchase 100 parking permits at a time. Thankfully, we've been able to explain to them that that's not the purpose of these public parking lots. And in that case, they're mostly looking at the Garden Street parking lot
Right.
as their space. But they understand the issue, and consequently, we haven't. They've walked away. They might have some employees who come in on their own and purchase them, but it's not 100 or 50 or 25.
Well, as tourism increases, this would give you power then to say, no, you can't have these permits?
As described in the proposed amendment, yes, it would give us the ability to deny permits when they would unduly interfere with access to the coast.
And I asked at the subcommittee meeting if there was any consideration could be given to having the Harbor Commission review a denial of a permit. And I gather there's no consideration being given to that.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, we could do that.
I mean, it's a pretty serious thing to tell somebody, no, you can't have a permit. And
It is and it isn't. If you're a funk zone business, a large successful business, and you're coming down to purchase a permit for your employee for 50 employees to park and not go to the beach or have anything to do with the coast, that's pretty apparent. So it would be our intent to, and we would hope that you would have the trust in us to exercise our professional responsibility to deny or accept in that particular case. It is up to the commission if you would be interested in that. One way to possibly proceed would be to see how it works in the first 6, 8, 12 months. But I think I'm confident that we have the ability to appropriately deny or approve these permits, being that we're down there.
I'm not I don't mean to imply that we don't have the trust in it. Excuse me?
Attorney Colon?
If I have the permission of the chair, I'd like to add to Mr.
Okay.
Bossi's response.
Yes.
Thank you. So Chair Stedman, Commissioner Kramer, there are two pieces of working in that section that you're looking at. One is a obligation of the waterfront director to manage and power and duty to manage. That's held in an individual official, and it would not make sense to have you second guess that. The second part, as Mr. Bossi said, is the specific duty of issuing the parking permit. Certainly you could review that if you wanted. And I'll add to Mr. Bossi's response from a legal point of view without really changing what he said, and it's this. Figuring out how much the city should spend to adjudicate, to have a little trial on whether somebody ought to get a permit, is something that you need to look, number one, at the value of the permit. So it's a relatively inexpensive parking permit. On the other hand, as Mr. Bossi said, it could affect a business in a fairly substantial way. So as you're deciding whether or not you want to take on the job of looking at parking permit appeals, which I think will be an unsavory task, as you know, you might want to balance the risks and costs.
I appreciate that description, but my concern is really for the public, that they would have or might have the right to appeal to the Harbor Commission. I don't think it would happen, but I would like to. I'm advocating for the right at least to exist, and not intending to imply that you guys are not capable of nice and thoughtful, and so forth. So that's my observation on that. Okay, but maybe none of the rest of the Harbor Commissioners would be interested in having that right. So.
Thank you, Mr. Colon.
Just as a matter of point on that and many other things, if someone has an issue with something that's happened or a decision made by the waterfront director, they can always bring it to the Harbor Commission for discussion regardless of what it is. Is that not correct?
I've never been able to stop a member of the public from coming to the
Right. Yeah.
council, so.
Yeah. And we've seen it several times at council lately about things that where commissions have made decisions and they've brought to the council. So I don't see if someone had an issue, for anything, they could bring it to us. I mean, and so I don't know that we need to, I mean, I'm just thinking of this
Yeah.
specifically, but there are many things. I think the only thing that's actually codified in there is the slip permit.
Well, and, you know, anything can be discussed, but they could bring an issue here, but we would have no power to rule in their favor.
I'm not sure that's true.
Well, maybe not. I don't know.
Mr. Chair, if I may, what we will do, this won't be willy-nilly. We will be very detailed in our responses, and we will track these responses accordingly.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Excellent. Commissioner McCray?
Yes, I would like to give enforcement an opportunity to comment, if you would like, on what's been proposed and how you feel about enforcing these measures as they are.
Chairman Stedman, Commissioner McCray, this issue has been on the table for a long time with patrol and the police department, and the rules and regulations that have trickled from the city standpoint down. We have been left with a lot of vehicles that have a safe haven. We are 100% behind what's on the table right now. It will lessen the amount of time that Harbor Patrol is spending doing parking enforcement, when a lot of times we should be out on the water and doing other things as well.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair, just one point of information, if you'll allow me, to piggyback on what Lieutenant Engelbretson said. We estimate that this would hopefully get about 50 vehicles out of the lot, which is almost 10% of the vehicles that are can on any given day occupy a harbor main. And to us, that's a significant number and a significant improvement.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. Yes.
So I find it persuasive that the staff has worked on this a lot, and that 3 members of the commission, subcommittee, has already reviewed this and approved it. But what is the, when you submit a request to amend the municipal code, what is the review process? Does that go to city attorney staff and then to the council?
That's a great question. Mr. Stedman, if I may, Commissioner Sly, it's a long and lengthy process. When you embark on ordinance changes, you got to be ready for a long, long process. And it's a very public process. So we started thinking about, I mean, this issue, as Mr. Engelbretson said, has been on the table for many years, and we finally, it was just time. So we initially started some meetings with the city attorney at our offices, talking just in generalities. Again, we had a public meeting where we heard a lot of great information from the public and what their thoughts were. They're the ones out there using it. We then crafted the proposed ordinance language, took it to the Harbor Commission Parking Subcommittee. We're here today before you. If you were to advance this, it would then move on to the city's ordinance committee in the month of September. After that, it would then go to city council. And then if it were approved in whatever form it is at that time, I believe it would be introduced one week, adopted the next week, and 30 days later become effective. So it's a lengthy, very detailed process.
I have a couple of questions. So just starting with the day workers, so what happens when City College starts up again?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sloan, I failed to mention this in the report, my bad. So City College starts up on the 26th. Again, this is a temporary situation. We had hoped that they could repair the pier within a month or two. They're at the very end. They're hoping that it will be complete, and the Casitas Pier, again, will be complete, up and running for both equipment and people, transporting people by the end of the month. We have told the two major contractors, City College starts. It's not a good idea for you to park over in those lots once that chaos begins, because City College, as we all know, the first 4 to 6 weeks at the waterfront is crazy. City College students are allowed with their permits to park in Ledbetter and Harbor West, but quite often it overflows and they come into other lots and pay by the hour just so they can go in and get their classes. So I'm in constant communication with the two major contractors, and we have told them at the Friday before the 26th, what is that, the 23rd, you got to find another location for these folks. So they already have folks being shuttled in, the overnighters. So that's between 30 and 50 folks. Right. But it's those larger group of day workers that we're concerned with. So our intent is to have them move on.
But it sounds like it's going to be short-lived one way or another. So even if we do have to accommodate them for a few weeks or a month, it's not the end of the world.
Correct. We'd rather not, and they're at the very end of the project. So we're really hoping, and they are hoping, and all signs point to they'll be out of here by the 23rd.
Right. Okay. The next one is in section 3.1 through 19. The long-term parking of vehicles that are primarily used for storage shall be discouraged and not displace coastal access. How do we enforce that? I mean, discouraged is hardly illegal. I mean, I get discouraged at home all the time. That doesn't stop me from doing much.
Chair Stedman, Commissioner Sloan, that's language out of the city's recently adopted local coastal program. So the meaning for me is that the Coastal Commission is not only behind your staff, they kind of upped them one with this amendment. So it is policy language, and it's usually spoken of in terms of shoulds and discourage and would, the normative rather than a mandatory, right? Things you ought to do. Right. We ought to eat more greens, okay? That doesn't mean it's unenforceable. What it means is that when your staff are making implementing decisions, they are not going to be able to ignore that policy. So imagine that macro world wants to open an office with 900 employees in West Beach. We will not become the dumping ground for that advantage.
Okay. Yeah. So that's really some of the basis for some of these other things that we've talked about, the 30 days and the vehicle size and some of those.
Very well put. It's the policy underpinning that supports the action you're going to take.
Right. Okay. Okay. I think that's all I had. Thank you very much.
I have a question, I guess. Something I see that kind of is lacking in all of this is that a study or a review of other harbors or other, waterfront entities throughout the state, and to see how they solve a similar problem. Because I think this is great, but it's I feel like it's a little bit of a Band-Aid, and it's not necessarily going to solve the long-term issue over many, many years and things that will be happening in the harbor. And I don't know if it's possible, or if it is possible, I think it'd be really great to actually do an actual analysis or to review and see, are these steps going to really solve the problem for the long term, or are there other ways that we could actually solve these problems that we'll be faced with for many more years?
That's a great question.
Chair Stedman, Commissioner Yaniv, we haven't undertaken a formal study. We have undertaken an informal study, if you will, as a board member of the California Harbor Masters and Port Captains Association for 16 years. I can attest to the fact that I've been sat in many meetings where parking resources were discussed. And like so many issues in the waterfront, the core problem is, whether it's slips or parking or lease space, demand wildly exceeds supply. And that is what generates the problems you're seeing today. There are other harbors like Channel Islands Harbor that has acres of hardscape where you could hold 20 barn dances and not impact any parking. But here it's quite the opposite. And so we have a limited resource and we have to make some very serious and important decisions, both discretionary and those like codified in the municipal code, so that these lots are used for their intended purposes. I don't know any other harbor that has a parallel challenge in California on the coast that we do.
Yeah. Also, another question is, have we done a cost analysis in terms of the price of the permits that we have, and how did we come up with the price that they're at now, and is it a fair price, or should they be increased, the price on a permit?
Chair Stedman, Commissioner Yaniv, sorry. It's your first meeting. I'm getting used to it too. That's a great, we've looked at the cost of permits in other cities, and I can tell you for a fact that the permit cost in Santa Barbara is a bargain, if I can say. At the very least, it is a bargain. Many cities have similar permit programs, but they charge $250, and that permit's only good weekdays from 8 to 5. So you can park your work car there, go to work, Santa Monica, places like that. So we have gone up and down and looked at a number of different cities. Again, we're very different. There's not much beyond the Santa Barbara area. I mean, you've got to go long stretches before you hit other ports and marinas. And so that's an impact. But we do routinely, every year, conduct a study of, I believe it's 18 private and public marinas up and down the coast of California, and ask them, I think it's about 100 different questions in spreadsheet format. And one of those is, how much are your parking permits? What are they good for? It's a huge undertaking by one of our staff members, Susan Hazard, and she does a great job of it. So we do analyze all sorts of parking issues. And this doesn't even just apply to parking resources. It applies to, do you issue key cards? What do you charge per key card? How many key cards do you? So it runs the gamut. So this is shared amongst all these different harbors. So if they submit something to us, we'll give them all this information back. So we're very well aware of what other folks are doing in other cities and towns.
Thank you.
Excellent. In the interest of time, I think we've aired out some pretty critical questions, including the public's right to appeal. Are there any other staff comments? Caesar? Yes, we'll get to the public in a moment.
Chair Stedman, I'm okay, no comment at this time.
Very well. Director?
We're ready for public comment, if you are.
Okay, I think we are. Doug Wixon, would you like to approach the podium? And just a reminder, 3-minute time limit. Okay, thank you.
Gentlemen, Ms. Lady, my name is Doug Wixon. I live on Mooring Number 1 in Santa Barbara, Mooring Field. Good? Okay. And I have a red parking permit. I also have, for that, so I'm retired. I live on fixed income. This is really going to affect me a lot.
I think, excuse me, Mr. Nixon, is that microphone on? The audience is not hearing.
Because maybe it's something there.
Try now, Doug.
How about now? Okay, there we go. Okay.
It's my fault.
Sure.
Sorry.
Okay.
High-tech panel.
Okay,
I'm going to reset your time, Doug.
All right, thank you. My name is Doug Wixon. I live in Mooring Field. I've got the number 1 mooring there. And I have a red parking permit. I've been living in the harbor for 13 years as a liveaboard out there. And I'm retired and live on fixed income. This is really going to affect me in a great way if the parking permit is not granted to me next year. And the reason for that is because I have an oversized vehicle. It's a Dodge ProMaster van. It's one of the 3 newer vans that would be disqualified from this because they're too big. The Mercedes-Benz is 115 inches tall. The Ford Transit is 110 inches tall. And the ProMaster is 100 inches tall. Okay, so all those new vans would be disqualified from this. The direct effect upon me is, without that permit, it's $12 a day. I use mine as a daily driver. That comes out to, wherever my notes are, I think it's $360 a month for parking. That makes it unfeasible, completely unfeasible. And I'm not the only one that's in this situation. Apparently, I'm the only one that's talking tonight, but I'm not the only one that's in that situation. So that makes that my choices are going to be really limited with this kind of a thing. I could sell the vehicle, but then I have to get another vehicle, and that's still going to take up a parking spot. I think the reason that the large vehicles are being used for storage units is because they're efficient. They take up a lot of space, and you can put a lot of stuff in them. If they have to be moved, therefore, they're not going to be used as storage units. So I think that is probably a large solution to your problem of making those vehicles move on a regular basis and a problem. The first letter that you got that was addressed to you guys from Mark Cooper and Eleanor Smith pretty much reflects my views of what's going on with the harbor. As I said, I go in and out of the harbor every day, and there are literally weeds growing up underneath some of those units that have flowered and died. Okay, I mean, they're not being used very much. Okay, so there is an issue there, but it's not the oversized vehicles. It's that they're not having to be moved. Any questions?
For those of us that weren't on the parking subcommittee, can you kind of talk about how we came up with the reason behind height restriction?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sloan, what we did was we've tried a number of different points to address this issue. And the one, and size seemed to us to be the most effective, that could improve the situation the best. And that was to deal with annual permits, red or blue, and within those permits, a size constraint. Again, we've lengthened it to 22 feet to accommodate more standard sized vehicles because vehicles have grown a little bit over years. The width is, I believe, the same as the city's on-street ordinance. And again, the height, we took that the city's ordinance and added another 8 inches to it to address that. Because what we've seen over the years in looking at what vehicles are being stored and just sitting there nonstop were these larger vehicles, larger oversized vehicles. And yes, there are smaller vehicles. I showed a photo of one. I think it was a Suburban, and that was stuffed and had not been moved in a long time as well.
And so there is if I remember the presentation correctly, there is a way that you could approve an oversized vehicle. Is that correct in the language?
That is correct, but there's a number of criteria associated with that.
Right.
And if I can just rehash those real quick. Possible waivers for commercial ocean-dependent priorities, including but not limited to commercial fishing operations, leaseholder businesses, business activity permit holders, and oil spill response vehicles.
Okay. So it would have
things such as a slip permittee would not be included as currently written.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if you allow me a comment, a follow-up to Commissioner Sloan's question. Not to oversimplify things, but this final slide right up here is very much an indicative answer, I think, to your question. A majority of those vehicles are being used as garages. And that's what we're trying to eliminate, the misuse of public parking privileges. in waterfront lots. I've often used the analogy, some of you may have heard it before, but in my view, and staff's view, if you will, an individual whose family saves up for a year in Topeka, Kansas, and comes out to spend some time in Santa Barbara has as much right to access to one of those parking spaces as anybody who considers themselves a local or considers themselves to have special privileges because they have a relationship with the harbor.
Thank you, Mick. Commissioner McCray?
Say, for example, this gentleman were to give his argument directly to staff. Would staff, how do you think staff would respond to a request for a special waiver to buy an annual red permit?
It's unfortunate. Mr. Wixon, out of respect for Mr. Wixon, Mr. Wixon is one of our most long-standing occupants of the mooring area. I believe you got in right at the beginning of it, and you've been there, since 2006. Unfortunately, on its face, without getting into a more granular analysis of what Mr. Wixon's issues are and why he needs an oversized vehicle, it would not meet the criteria being advanced in the ordinance this evening, when he would be denied.
Which means essentially that I would be selling my boat and moving on because it's $4,000 a year. So it's a difference.
We appreciate your comments, Mr. Wixon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, staff.
I have a question.
Question, Commissioner Kramer?
What about the point that Mr. Cooper and Ms. Smith makes about having, deferring this for 90 days and giving additional publicity for it? And dock lines and so forth?
Chair Stedman, Commissioner Kramer, we have been working at this for quite some time. And we've publicized this all over the place. I'm not sure what else can be what else can be done as far as getting it out to the public. We've had a public workshop. A month and a half later, we had a subcommittee meeting. A month later, we're here. So we've been working on this for quite some time. I'm not sure what else could be done as far as public outreach. It's unfortunate that Mr. Cooper and his wife aren't here. They're valued members of the community, and they do have an oversized vehicle, a very nice one that sits in the Harbor Main parking lot. And it sits there for quite some time on occasion, but it's not one of the vehicles you see up on the screen.
So these are basically vehicles that are not moved at all? They just sit there and just...
Many of them just sit there, yes.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what would be gained by adding another 90 days, 30 days, et cetera. But it's up to the discretion of the Harbor Commission. We feel that we've done a very good job of outreach and coordinating efforts as far as this is concerned.
And is there any possibility for somebody, I don't know Mr. Wixon at all, but is there any possibility for for him or somebody like him to appeal to the waterfront director for an exception to this? Or is it a hard and fast rule?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, I think Mr. Cromman just answered that question as currently written, based on what Mr. Wixon informed us and the basic facts as written, it would be denied.
So he could appeal, then it would be denied, basically. Does it sound right?
If, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, if the commission were to introduce the idea of the ability to appeal to the Harbor Commission, as currently written, as was presented earlier in the report, as currently written, it would stop there. Again, based on our knowledge of the situation, our knowledge of the parking situation on a day-to-day basis down in the harbor.
But these vehicles would not be allowed to park on the city streets either under the new parking or street parking ordinance. Is that correct? Anybody know the answer to that?
If they were above the size constraints of the city-wide ordinance, and I believe the height requirement for that one is the 82.
Right. So
and consequently, that particular ordinance then even drove more people down into harbor and waterfront lots to park.
So the cities determine that there are certain sizes that they don't want on the city streets, and so we've actually added a little bit to those and said that we want to continue that thinking down into the harbor lots.
we've been a little bit more generous as far as the height requirement, yes. But again, we have different requirements than the city's ordinance. So.
Is there a city appeal process that someone with an oversized vehicle?
Chair Stedman, Commissioner Sloan, yes, there is. The city permit's very different because the ability to park on a public street has been analogized to a necessity of life where somebody needs to sleep, whereas in a private lot, we don't have that issue. So the city's program constrains the vehicles to smaller sizes, but then separately, the council provided alternative locations where people could put those vehicles at low or no cost during daytime hours,
right,
so that they'd be available. So Mr. Bossy started to describe the long history of how we got to where we are. This process was very well informed by the citywide process and was redesigned to be what we thought was simpler and more fair in these respects. More fair in the sense that rather than having a size criteria that were aimed at kind of regular vans, they took a look at the larger vehicles in the parking lots and are actually proposing having a longer length and relatively high boxy kinds of vehicles. So that's number one. Number two, the real prize in all of this is for the first time, the city through you, the ordinance committee and city council will be saying in the code that maritime, coastal access, water, I've forgotten the other one, Brian, but those purposes are what's driving the decision-making around parking in the harbor. So just that unifying concept, I think, will guide things. Now, certainly there are going to be people who are harmed. I heard Mr. Cronman say 10% was the number. That doesn't make it easier if you're one of the 10%, but it is a smaller than larger number, fortunately. And the alternative here is not to leave. The alternative is to find a different vehicle, frankly.
Thank you very much, Attorney Colon. We have one more public comment. Nicole Biergale. Just a reminder, limit your comments to 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Appreciate your patience.
Yeah, thanks, Chair and Commissioners. I'm a liveaboard in the harbor, along with my husband here. My name's Nicole Bergil, close. And that is one subset of permittee, slip permittee, and also parking slip holders that I haven't heard a lot about tonight. And while it is a small group, we have pretty special circumstances. One thing I would just note is that I would want to make sure that we were considered in the maritime purposes for leaving vehicles more than 72 hours, because that is my home. That is where I leave my car when I travel. There's only, I think, about 100 of us, or, you know, liveaboard slip permittee holders. So if that could be considered, I'd really appreciate that. And then in terms of, I appreciate that the staff has been thinking about this for a long time, but I first heard about this in June and was out of town for that first meeting, the workshop, and was also working the night of the subcommittee meeting. So this has been my first chance to share any comments, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, if you would.
Yes,
if you allow me to respond to the last speaker, unless there are more speakers.
Just one more, sorry.
My apologies, I'll stand down.
Thanks, Brian. Go ahead, Nick.
I was just going to comment that, not to be the bearer of bad news, but the fact of the matter is that slip permits and liveaboard permits are simply that. They're a permit to occupy a space in the water, and they're a permit to occupy, to live aboard. And with that may come some perception or expectation that there are ancillary privileges that come with it, as in a van that might exceed the specifications that are being advanced in the proposed amendment tonight. That simply isn't the case. The liveaboard permit is a permission to live aboard, you know, full stop. And I think, you know, point to Mr. Cronman's testimony, but I'm here to tell you that that's staff's perspective, that it doesn't come with storage, it doesn't come with garage, it doesn't come with special parking privileges, and that's just the reality. As Mr. Kalan mentioned, there will be a little bit of pain for some people, but it's worth it in the big picture for us to come into compliance and articulate the fact that this is a public parking lot and any exceptions need to be for ocean-dependent uses. Living aboard it might seem, because it's, it's a vessel that rests on the water, as an ocean-dependent use. It's not an ocean-dependent use in terms of the issue before us tonight, before the commission.
Thank you for that perspective, Mr. Conman. And we have one more public comment, right?
Claiborne.
Robert
Yes.
Claiborne?
Yes.
You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Harbor Commission. My name is Robert Claycomb. I've been in the harbor since 1996, either way back then as a liveaboard, and now I just have my boat in the harbor. I actually own a Sprinter, but I wouldn't park it in the harbor. I park it down in Carpinteria. We pay for it to get out there, since the city doesn't allow me to park in my house. I actually support everything that the staff has written on this thing. And this I sat in this room in 2013, 2012, something like that, when a lot of these same issues were being bantered back and forth. And we've sat back over the years, and the same issues are being bantered back and forth. And the same vehicles are still sitting where they were sitting in 2012 and 2013. So I do support that, and yes, I understand that some people, and I do know a couple of people that own those things. Are they going to be happy campers? No. But I'm sorry, I don't agree with turning that into a public storage lot. It's a parking lot. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Any other questions from the commission? Any further comments from staff? All right, do we have a motion to review and forward this proposal?
I have
I would,
go ahead. Suggestion. Go ahead.
Merritt?
You first.
I'd like to suggest that we approve the proposal, but I would like to just ask that we have some sort of regular updates on how this is going, maybe on a 3-month, 6-month basis, something like that, just to see, is it working? What are the problems? We used to track how many days a lot was full, and we probably still do. It's just I haven't heard that personally in a while, but see if that helps alleviate the problem. I know we're coming at the end of summer, and we're kind of into the high season, and so it might not be for a year till we really understand the full impact of this till next summer. But just to see some of the things and address what Commissioner Kramer asked about, how many of these have we denied and things like that, and just kind of give us a feel of how the program's going. I think these are all good things. It alleviates a problem that we have had for a long time. I agree that we've been talking about this for way too long, so that would be my suggestion, that we approve it with the caveat that we do get updates on it.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sloan, we'd be happy to give updates.
Yes, that was the motion.
And we do have Cesar Barrios here, our parking supervisor, who, if you want to know, off the top of his head, and he does have this information off the top of his head, how many days we fill up. But just a clarification, if this ordinance moves forward and goes through the process and eventually gets approved, it would take effect with the sales of the new permits.
So starting calendar 2020.
Exactly. So we open up those sales for 2020 on December 1st of this year. So when you go in to buy it on December 1st, you would be subject to this new ordinance. Just to clarify.
So some periodic, maybe in late spring or something, just to see how it's going. That's all. I just think that to address some of these issues, we'd just like to hear about it. So I would propose a motion to accept it with that caveat.
And I would second it. I believe that the greater good is definitely served by what you put forward here. We have the support of enforcement, which speaks to the detail that's included within the proposed regulations. So it seems to me that those professionals have reasonably reviewed it and think that they can work with these regulations as they're proposed. I realize that there's going to be some pain, but as Mr. Cronman has pointed out, it's a public parking lot, and we're finally addressing the Coastal Act in what you've proposed. So I second this. Thank you.
Excellent. So just to reiterate, we have a motion, it's been seconded to forward this proposal with the caveat that we review it periodically. Is that?
Yeah.
Is that correct? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Motion carries. And now we move to the favorite part of the meeting. Is there a motion for adjournment? Okay. Do you have any further staff communications before we entertain a motion to adjourn? Director Bossi?
We do not, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. I came in a little late behind Director Bossi. I believe Lieutenant Engelbretson had one item for staff communications he wanted to advance to you relative to a question that was brought up last month.
Chair Stedman, Commissioner Kramer, this was just outreach to the police department. You had a question in regards to the volunteer in policing program on Stearns Wharf. And I have reached out to him, and I am waiting word, just to let you know that's where we're at.
Thank you very much. I hadn't forgotten, but I had forgotten. So I appreciate that.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Eric.
I'd like to move that we adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. We are adjourned. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye. Aye. We are now officially adjourned.